Welcome back, and I did hear the bumper, so we're live with Ryan. And Ryan, I was just talking about all the research I'm doing on molecular mechanisms of insulin resistance in humans and their potential links with mitochondrial dysfunction. And I'm going to start posting a lot of these articles and writing like a kind of a mini summary because they get pretty technical. But what they basically mean is if you don't fully oxidize fatty acids in your muscles, you get insulin resistance, and that's caused basically by your tissues becoming resistant to leptin and adiponectin. These are molecules that your white fat, which actually is an exocrine hormone-producing organ. You get a side effect of pro-inflammatory fatty acids and cytokines that actually cause heart disease, cause hypertension, cause these other problems. So you can change that by number one, getting away from omega-6 fatty acids. Don't cook or go to restaurants that use old oil, soy oil, canola oil, peanut oil. These kind of oils, they're bad. They're omega-6, pro-inflammatory, and they also oxidize cholesterol. It's only oxidized cholesterol that gets under your artery walls. Regular cholesterol has no effect at all. So having as many eggs as you want, as long as they're good organic eggs, and they're raised like wild, and they're the same with animals. Eat grass-fed beef. It's got the same fatty acid concentrations as salmon. Try not to have penned salmon, because if they're feeding it food pellets of bottom feeder fish, you're going to get all the biotoxins absorbed by those bottom feeder fish grabbing all the garbage at the bottom of the garbage eating fish. They eat the garbage at the bottom of the ocean floor, near the coast. So a lot of stuff just makes common sense. What the doctors will try to tell you is, they give all their diabetics, for example, HMG-CoA reductase inhibitors. It turns out there's a giant lawsuit now, and the big legal firms are going after physicians like crazy that now HMG-CoA reductase inhibitors is causing diabetes, and they got proof for it now. So you're not going to have doctors that don't look into the biochemistry, that don't measure labs tests like Genova Metametrics, as I mentioned, lab testing direct, and I can actually tell you free what test to order. You can get your organics test. In fact, I did my cardio ion panel, and I also got the organic acid comprehensive profile of urine. It's neat. I mean, it tells you every territory and area that you can recheck. You can also recheck it on your QRMA machine and your Bioplasma NLS. I tell people, if you want to get well, get a QRMA, and then when you want to target your testing, go through lab testing direct, and I'll tell you what tests to do. You'll save 70%. You'll prove to yourself, too, that Nutrimeds is the way to go. We have people that have been now doing QRMAs for a year, and they're remarkably better. And the Nutrimeds, our Nutrimeds, are far superior. We have people that have been on all kinds of other formulas from different companies, Nutrition by Design, this, that, Metametrics, other companies, or even professional, and forget the ones that are just like over the counter, or you can just go on Amazon. You're just asking for trouble. By and large, they're just really, really inferior. And you're not going to get the targeted nutrition, because, in fact, if you take nutritional supplements that are out of balance for your particular problem, you may actually not address the issues at all, or even create a greater imbalance. So Ryan, the recent studies, of course, they use this thing called magnetic resonance spectroscopy to look at the insulin-stimulated muscle glycogen synthesis due defect in insulin glucose transport activity. And, of course, beside leptin metabolic, I call it's factors for lowering insulin resistance, which is the big bugaboo of our modern culture. It's the cause of some people getting hypertensive. It's the cause of other people getting diabetic. It's the cause of other people getting cataracts, other people getting dementia, because we even know now that dementia, if you don't have a virus growing in your brain, which can be activated by your brain's microglia starting to get deficient, is basically a diabetes of the brain, where your brain can't metabolize sugar. It starts to require MCT, medium chain triglycerides, like coconut oil. So let's talk about this for a minute. We have LipoFlush along with diabetoline, Biotin Plus, and of course leptin metabolic are my favorite new nutraceutical. And I take a higher dosage than what they recommend. They say 1 in the morning. Actually, I take more than that. I take at least 2 a day. And the way you can measure it to see if you're getting there. The first thing you're going to notice is if you've had ketosis on your diet. If you're taking the right amount of leptin metabolic, the ketosis will go away on the multi-sticks, 11 sticks of your urine. And that means you're going to be following like a diet like I call the George Cruise. That's Jorge Cruise. belly fat diet, they call it, basically he's cutting total carbohydrates and total sugars. I like the phone app called Low GI, which measures glycemic index. And it's, by the way, this is for everybody. It's not just for people that are trying to lose an extra 5 or 10 or 20 or 30 pounds. It's not just for people who are hypertensive or have any other issues. Our entire culture is sugar maniac crazy. And it's not only that sugar, it's the artificial sugar, things like Splenda and aspartame, which are particularly deadly, diketopiperazine from aspartame. So let's talk about LipoFlush for a minute, Biotin Plus and diabetoline. These are really important. People trying to lose weight in the summer. You really want to change your insulin resistance, and I talk about people using vitamin VX or vibrational exercise too. And one of the best diuretics, for example, to pull off the excess salt and fluid is just a Power C Plus with the full vitamin K2. It'll yank off the fluid off you very nicely as a natural diuretic.
Yeah, I think that, you talk so much about people's blood sugar and so forth, and we get caught up with weight and wondering, like, hey, what do I need to do to lose weight? Well, I think, as you're talking about, weight's this byproduct. It's a byproduct of a dysfunctional system. It's not just the calories that you put in, but the system is messed up. It's going to start storing, and that's where you start breaking down new barriers with things like, leptin metabolic. So this is a very unique substance where they were able to basically derive it out of the comb of roosters, so the little top part, and it's a very, very specific molecule that comes out of there that when given to overweight individuals with an osteoarthritic condition, so they were bent already having an inflammatory process, what they saw was that the fat cells were not forming like they normally would in these individuals. They're getting less fat cell formation, but then they were noticing things like inflammation, both in the synovial fluid, which you find in the joints, and the fluid of the blood, going way down across the board. And then the real kicker there too is at the same time these individuals were then basically less hungry. They looked at things like leptin, and they started seeing that they're getting less and less need for leptin, I should say, it's a lower amount. And that means the feedback mechanism between your fat cells telling your brain that you have enough stored fuel already in your body was working properly. So imagine driving your car and you don't have a fuel gauge that works. Or it's always saying that you're empty, except you've just filled up your tank. That's a lot like when you go in, a lot of people go and eat, and they're like, I just ate. Why am I hungry again and again and again? This doesn't make any sense. The fuel gauge, the mechanism that tells you, hey, brain, we're fueled up and we're ready to go. We can run for a long way, is not working right. And leptin metabolic breaks through a totally new barrier in this area.
Yeah. Now, interesting, there's a crosstalk between the glycosaminoglycans, which are present in leptin metabolic, and the pathways that regulate leptin sensitivity and adiponectin sensitivity. Years ago, about 20-some years ago, when they discovered leptin, so, we got the cure for obesity, because when you give animals leptin, it actually shut off their appetite. It shut off the VML nucleus in the brain. What people notice when they start taking leptin metabolic, they get a thing I call the push-away syndrome. They eat their meals more slowly, and then when they feel full, they just say, full, had enough, and they push away. It's amazing, and to be honest, it's actually using the physiological reflexes of your gut, like cholecystokinin and gastric inhibitory peptide, that actually tell you're full, but it also regulates the total number of carbohydrates coming into your body. Because I think if leptin is acting properly, you don't eat too much sugar, you don't eat too much carbohydrates, because to be honest with you, our bodies are not designed for it. You've got to think of how long it takes for a body to adapt over many centuries to a specific change in diet. And the agricultural diet that we've been on for the last, let's say 10,000 to 50,000, 75,000 years, that's not sufficient to be able to adapt to that, especially highly refined. Now, if it's unrefined, it's flax and other things, well, you can tolerate some more, which is why things that are particularly modified now, like gluten, wheat gluten, are really bad for you. Your body just can't cope with it. And especially sugary things like sugary pops with, 20 teaspoons of sugar per can of pop. It's no wonder we're having troubles. Back in just a moment. Welcome back. I want to talk about another interesting side effect of what we're talking about. If you actually measure, and you can do this through Genova Labs, the entire population, you find out that over age, say, 30, 75 to 80% of the population are insulin resistant. By the time you get to 70, it's like 98%. It's very rare, actually, you find somebody who's not insulin significantly insulin resistant. Now, you may not be hyperglycemic yet, but you could be making abnormal lipids or increased oxidative stress. It turns out, if you have, Schnittenbrot type German bread or some really heavy, flax bread, or non-wheat gluten bread, it takes like a day to absorb it. Your body is going to have a much different glucose curve. Now, what happens with the carbo block, which is also present in the glycemics, it's not just reducing your blood sugar and the glycemic load, it's also reducing blood insulin. Now, insulin is pro-inflammatory. So if you look at C-reactive protein, if you look at oxidized fatty acids, if you look at blood pressure, if you look at even energy metabolism, because if it's inflammatory, it also interferes with energy metabolism, the heart muscle, the blood vessel walls, the arterioles. You got to reduce insulin. So I tell people that's why I like the what's called the belly fat diet from George Cruz, because it's not just for people who are overweight. If they have abnormal lipids, you don't race and try to get them on, off. Don't eat eggs and don't eat this, that. Yeah, don't eat pro-inflammatory fatty acids like peanut butter and soy oil and everything. Only cook with, say, coconut oil. And you can have a small amount of butter. That's fine. But you want to have omega-6 fatty acids, but you have to block sugar. Now, the neat thing about carbo block, it's a dual action. It actually works as with both alpha amylase to block starch degrading enzymes, but it also has alpha glucosidase, the sucrose degrading enzyme. So it has this dual activity for high glycemic food. So if you take this before a meal, it's not just going to be reducing blood sugar for those people who just have now got so much insulin resistance they're now into a diabetic or pre-diabetic range. It's going to reduce blood insulin, because insulin is something that's completely ignored by our physicians. They don't look at blood insulin. If you measure at Genova Labs, they'll actually tell you what your blood insulin is fasting or 1 or 2 hour post-meal, and you'll find that virtually the entire population are hyperinsulinemic. And their insulin output, if you actually check it, and this is even by standards compared to our so-called population, which isn't really normal. If you look at a normal population, it's probably in the third world, where they're eating kind of native foods, and they're not overweight. And our insulin levels are insane. And of course, that causes leptin resistance, it causes pro-inflammation, and causes heart disease. It's insulin. It's not necessarily even... By the time they get into blood sugar, they're frankly diabetic. They've had elevated insulin levels for maybe 3 decades since they were a teenager or younger, which is finds fatty streaks even in babies in our culture, which means they're getting oxidative stress and oxidized fatty acids getting into the intima of their artery walls even as an infant before 10 months of age. So carbo block, let's talk about it for a minute. This is a real big deal. It's present in glycemics. That's why when I tell people to get my smoothies, and sometimes I want to cut it short, say, no, I don't want to get all 3. I just want life support. No. You want to get life support ageless glycemics. And the reason is you want the ageless for the immunoglobulins and the SGS to repair your tissues and cells, the lactoferrin and colostrum to boost your immune system. You want to get the life support for all the minerals and vitamins, but also the second phase 2 detox. And you want the glycemics because it's going to reduce your blood insulin. It's going to reduce tissue inflammation. It's going to reduce blood sugar and the glycemic load. Inflammation's bad. Insulin's bad. Elevated blood insulin is only there as an adaptive response to a bad situation, too much sugar, and to try to keep you, quote, normal glycemic. Your blood sugar normal. And when people are turning frankly diabetic, it's just because it's the end of the road. Now their body is putting out 3, 4, 5, 6 times the amount of insulin, but the resistance is even greater than that. Now all of a sudden they're dumping. But if you look at everybody in our Western culture, we're all basically hyperinsulinemic. We get way too much rapidly absorbed carbohydrates and sugar in our diet. Right. And especially since the 80s, where they actually gave them these low-fat yogurts and... I mean, it's insane how much sugar is in our diet. And then the artificial sweeteners, too, they raise your blood insulin even more than sugar, like aspartame and Splenda will raise your blood sugar insulin more than sugar. That's how bad it is.
These are things that people just don't, they have a hard time contemplating. We stripped out all the fiber, most of the nutrients, and then added back in sugar and or artificial sweeteners that are triggering another type of response that like you're saying, it could still have the insulinemic based response, but at the same time, it's a chemical that your body's never seen before, and that only sets it up for even worse problems, on a different level. And I really want to point out that for most people out there, they get, they may get overwhelmed with how many, pills they want to take a day and stuff like that. But starting, like you said, with these shakes like glycemic meal, number one, why? The carbo blocker is already in there. You're already running the ALA, the green tea, the cinnamon extract that you're going to find in things like diabetoline. You're getting high amounts of beneficial fiber. You're getting 21 grams of protein per serving, which is a patented vegan protein that also helps with appetite regulation. Fat soluble B1. It's really packed with so many great nutrients that work on.
What I'll sometimes do is I'll actually take that base formula, that smoothie, open up the capsules for my daughter, and have a separate container, and put a quarter, an eighth, of a tenth of a teaspoon into her glass, and then mix and crunch it along the side there till it mixes in to the smoothie, and she doesn't detect it. So people say, well, I can't swallow pills. Don't. Open the capsules, make them powder, keep it in the fridge in a little kind of sealed container, take a little bit, make your smoothie up, put a little bit of that in the container, need be reblend it with a microblender, just take a spoon and mix it afterwards until you've broken all those little powder fragments down so they get absorbed and mix in really nicely, and chug. You'll love it, chocolate, vanilla flavored. And then you don't have to swallow any pills, especially if you got a senior citizen and say, I can't swallow pills. Don't. Make up a powder with the 20 or 30 capsules you might need. And I tell people it's important you get a small amount of the right thing several times a day rather than none of the right thing except maybe once a week. It's more important to get small amounts several times a day than large amounts that are infrequent because it's yucky or it's inconvenient or you don't like swallowing that many pills. So that's what I do with my daughter. It works for anybody. Senior citizen, a person that's an athlete, make up a powder thing, throw it in the make a smoothie up. I keep my smoothie in my Ninja blender, reblend it in the Ninja blender. I even open up the bone generator capsule. So if I want to get, I take almond coconut milk called Khalifa that has no sugar in it, and I open up the bone generator capsules and put the powder directly in the smoothie. So my smoothie is Glycemix, Life Support, Ageless Energize, NutriComplete, Omega Cod Liver Liquid, Nutriodine, D-ribose, acetyl-L-carnitine, and of course Bone Generator. And my daughter doesn't even know it. I put a little bit of her superpower with her other nutraceuticals, which is like 20 or 30 other things, and mix it up, and she just chugs it in about 2 seconds, and she's had her supplements. That's the way to do it. Don't swallow pills, drink them. Welcome back, and Ryan. So our whole approach when we're talking about nutraceuticals is quite a bit more advanced than a lot of people realize. For example, the conventional lab, and I've just looked at another lab here, a lot of the labs will not measure reverse thyroid hormone, and because I did research with the head of pathology and I brought the test from Germany, I found out that if you don't measure RT3 or reverse thyroid hormone, your test is useless, because if you measure free T4 and free T3 and you don't have free RT3 and your reverse thyroid hormone level is high, you're still functioning hypothyroid, and you don't necessarily have to have antibodies to your microsomal or thyroglobulin to indicate you have what we call TRS, or thyroid resistant syndrome. Everyone who is diabetic or pre-diabetic with elevated insulin levels has got TRS. You can have normal T4 and T3 levels free. Core body temperature can be low. You'll end up with decreased and abnormal oxidative metabolism, so you don't burn off fat efficiently, which means you're going to tend to get weight problems, insulin resistance, and if pre-diabetes basically is elevated insulin resistance. And if you measure fasting 1 and 2 hour PC blood sugar and blood insulin levels, you find that everyone with elevated reverse thyroid hormone has elevated insulin resistance. Their insulin levels are high, 100%. But you won't find the doctors doing this. It's going to be in my books that are coming out in Functional Quantum Medicine, because I've looked for years to try to see this. The same thing with measuring specific markers for electropollution. We have the latest research now being published, but I've been measuring DNA and other markers for 30 years. Before there were even conventional labs that could measure them, like Genova Labs, Metametrics, and these other labs like Doctors Data. I use university laboratories. And when you're looking at nutraceuticals to stabilize blood sugar, we're also looking at things that work in the brain. Most people, they kind of discount the brain and say, oh, no, it doesn't have an effect on the brain. One of the first treatments they used to use for very aggressive diabetes, for example, is to cut go through a Caldwell-Luck procedure and go through the sinus cavity to cut the hypophysis, the actual connection between the hypothalamus and the pituitary gland. So you can do that naturally to get your body back into balance with things like Calm Mind, which is going to have L-theanine, which is another good thing, combined with, say, LipoFlush for stabilizing the brain metabolism, along with Carbo-Block, diabetes, etc., and Glycemics. Glycemics and Carbo-Block are a major breakthrough because our whole Western society is so sugar-oriented, it's nuts. It's really crazy. And on top of that, we're mineral deficient to even handle the sugar properly, like magnesium, manganese, thiamine. And if they have too much sugar, by the way, your body overgrows fungus in your gut, and it has thiaminase that destroys thiamine. So you end up with neurological problems like, Wernicke's and Korsakoff's encephalopathy, where you can actually lose your broken motor speech area in your brain. You can't even speak or be understood by people. That's not good. So
that would not be good at all.
Yeah, so Calm Mind. Let's talk about Calm Mind, and it's very popular. We have people actually order it by the case. They say, this is good stuff. I never want to run out of this. And they'll get the flavored or unflavored, and we have international orders, too. They can mix it up, make a drink, a nice cool drink to keep in a big jug in the refrigerator and just sip on it. It has GABA, suntheanine, and L-theanine, and it has myo-inositol, which also stabilizes blood sugar. Helps to stabilize also blood insulin resistance because it's a stress hormone. That's really important, right?
Well, like you said, I mean, this is a game changer because most people are dealing with an abundant amount of stress that they have to self-medicate using things like alcohol or other drugs, and then the fact is, there's a lot of this is happening. It's because of the nutrient deficiencies. If you don't have enough myo-inositol, which is one of the core ingredients in this in Calm Mind, then the neurotransmitters can't communicate properly. So things like serotonin and dopamine, which you're going to need to regulate your behavior and your attitude and your cravings, is all predicated on this. So with Calm Mind, all of a sudden your body can now recognize what its true needs are versus those needs that you just, are created because you feel,
right.
Moody, or you had a bad day at work, or the kids are stressing you out, or something like that.
Well, a lot of people don't realize moodiness is easily fixed if you reduce oxidative stress, normalize mineral levels in the body, and that we use things like our Indiamese and our Vitamin Mineral Max Minerals Plus. All of our drinks have all the activated albion-chelated minerals. You want all the activated forms of the vitamins. In fact, if you have inactivated forms, it can actually cause more trouble. When we see things like elevated uric acid, it automatically tells us there's a methylation problem, so they need sammethyl, bio-LVR, superfolate, and power-methyl B12. I mean, that's a given. So as soon as I see someone's QRMA test, or they just tell me their history, I have gout or elevated uric acid, or the urine test, the doctor said I have this and that, all the doctors are going to do is they're going to give them drugs to try to make their kidneys dump the uric acid out faster. It doesn't fix the biochemical pathway. Uric acid actually burns your artery walls, so just making it dump quicker doesn't mean it's going to reduce the risk to your artery walls of elevated uric acid, because you got ammonia toxicity. That's what's going on. You got ammonia poisoning of your bloodstream. But the doctors don't address that, do they?
No, they don't. Like many things, sort of gets just skipped and considered a non-issue in a lot of ways. Unfortunately,
well, they're running in the gerbil cage. I call it the gerbil cage of healthcare. The doctors want to hold themselves up as being the experts, but the fact is they're not, because they, number one, don't test the biochemical pathways on the patients they have. They don't intervene with, number one, with exercise, lifestyle, and diet, and nutraceuticals based on each individual person's toxic past history, genetic load, and biochemistry and their epigenetics, and their personal exposure, if they're in a military exposed to toxins, or worked in a machine shop, or drank water for years that haven't even laced with toxic pesticides or heavy metals, or toilet to tap water in some big cities like New York City. They've been doing it for years. Or the fact they may have had inappropriate medical care in the past with overuse of antibiotics, so they've got a major dysbiosis in their gut. That's a very common thing. In fact, when you do a test like the organics test at Genova Labs, they'll tell you if you got things like indican, if it's elevated, it means you've got an overgrowth of fungi in your gut. If you have certain abnormal gut bacteria, they'll pick it up. If you do a CDSA2 test, it can actually tell you, oh yeah, you've got XYZ bad growing in your gut, and we got to get rid of this. Well, we use things like our Allison Med. And we use things like our Ageless to heal the gut wall. We use probiotics like Living Probiotic. We use berberstatin that has not only good at clearing the pathogens from the gut, but also normalizing the gut hormones, especially things like proterolin, which is a TRH that helps your peripheral conversion of T4 to T3 and not reverse thyroid hormone. Very, very common to see all of these things in I call them biochemical clusters. For example, if people are getting mood disorders, the first thing you think of is that they have deficiency of methylation. So they need bio-LVR, and they need Semethyl, and they need power-methyl B12 and superfolate. They have deficiencies in things like molybdenum, manganese, and magnesium, etc., for bioconversion of these amino acids to neurotransmitters to make their mood get better. When we see people that are having memory problems, we have to think that, well, there's 3 stages to memory. The first stage is what's called virtual, which is a neural network, and so you have to be able to create an action potential or energy. So we use things in our Cognition Plus that raise your ability of your neurons to fire, to create an action potential. You need to restore normal myelination, so things like Nutrifos, Neurogen, Omega Supreme Krill. All these will help to stimulate, and DHA, which is the neurogen, is going to stimulate nerve cells to regenerate. And then you need the final phase, which is we call the microtubule phase, that needs the proper production of RNA and DNA. So you need all the cofactors for that. So as we provide each of these steps, each organ you're trying to fix, whether it's the liver because you get hepatitis, and you're going to take things like cell defense, which is an anti-inflammatory for the liver, antipathogenics like Allison Med, things like Nutrimedical Velvet for rebuilding the tissue, Collagen Max for rebuilding the connective tissues of the liver and other organs. The body will start to regenerate. Welcome back. Now, we're talking about carbo blocker. Let's talk about lactose blocker. Milk lactose is everywhere. We have the only neutral pH lactase enzyme in the world. We're not just in any company. There is no competition. That's why many of our products we have, a lot of people say, it sounds like what we have, like the CoQ10 Supreme. We have the only CoQ10 Supreme, the only CoQ10 in the world that doesn't crystallize, which means after a month or two, it still has this biological activity. All other forms of CoQ10, they crystallize, they lose their biological activity after a month, they're down to like 5%. So people say, well, I have so many milligrams. I say, you have milligrams on the label. But pasting the label on the sore body part will not fix you. So
I always like that expression. Yeah, you paste the label on you. Unfortunately, that's not the way these work.
Yeah, exactly. Same way when we use a water extraction technique for our green tea select. We have one of the only low temperature water extraction techniques. So it's not solvents. It doesn't destroy it. It has its biological activity. So one capsule of the green tea select is equivalent to 10 pots of green tea, which, by the way, also helps with your fatty acid metabolism. It's a very great booster of fatty acid burning off. So if you're trying to, along with a lipoflush, take green tea select and our NutriDefense, along with the diabetoline and other things. Now, healing the gut wall, we talk about a sore joint, and this is a really common complaint. I just recently had a consult. The lady bumped her proximal interphalangeal joint, which is the first joint of the first knuckle of the right hand fourth finger, which would be the ring finger on the left hand, but it's the ring finger on the right. Some people wear rings there, but they're not married rings. They're other rings. And that joint swelled up, fusiform swelling. If she kind of babied it along, it kind of settled down. But then it got so bothersome that very minor injuries that caused the swell to get real painful, so that almost any move you make, you bump into it or you try to grip things. So the first advice I would give to that lady would be, number one, apply curcumin cream every 2 to 4 hours on the hand. And you don't need to go slather it, just apply it, and it'll rub it in and disappear. I tell people, you don't have to put a Band-Aid on it, just rub it in. Next thing is you want to take both Cell Defense, least 2 capsules twice a day, and Inflamax, anywhere from 2 to 5 capsules twice a day. The average woman will need 2 to 3 twice a day. You want to use, you want those tenocytes, the modified fibroblasts, to go back from being swollen and not working properly. So you want to take Tendon Mender 1 twice a day. Joint Performance, remodeling the joint back to normal, 1 twice a day. Collagen Max, at least 1 twice a day. Because it's a big deal. If you don't do this, eventually that joint's going to become very arthritic. If it's been going on 6 months, it means it's well on its way into becoming a fully osteoarthritic joint. And this is real common. It doesn't matter if it's the inside medial meniscus of your knee and you got a partial bucket handle tear of the medial meniscus, and you might even need an orthopedic surgeon to tack it down, but your body will if you use our nutraceuticals like I just mentioned, including maybe Mountain Red Velvet. But Collagen Max, Tendon Mender, Joint Performance of the Core, and of course leptin metabolic, again, because that person who has an elevated tendency toward osteoarthritis, they're going to have elevated joint cytokines. So even if they're not overweight, which is very commonly the case, someone says, well, I'm not overweight, I'm not diabetic. Yeah, but if we actually measured your blood insulin levels, we'd find out that you have markers of elevated blood insulin and elevated cytokines. And that's what's interesting. A lot of people don't tie it in together. They think, well, I'm not diabetic, I'm not overweight, I don't have lipids, but you didn't have lipids measured, have you? If you did, you go and the doctor says, oh, look at your lipids. You're showing HDL cholesterol is lower than it should be, or small particle HDL is elevated, VLDL3. If you measured cytokines, which your knucklehead doctor is not going to measure all the advanced cytokines that cause the joint to be inflamed, like, TNF-alpha, IL-6, etc., they're not going to measure that. They're going to do something stupid like the old SED rate, which they did in the ancient Egyptians 2,600 years ago. They're not going to measure the right stuff. They're going to measure stupid things that don't mean anything. So what you want to do is you want to use natural anti-inflammatories. If the doctor gave you an anti-inflammatory like ibuprofen or Celexa or celebrexamine or any of these other anti-inflammatories, they cross your blood-brain barrier, they screw up your heart, they cause you to slough off the inside lining of your stomach or esophagus. They're dangerous. They interfere with glycosaminoglycans. They actually accelerate joint degeneration. They interfere with cross-linking even of the collagen and connective tissues of the joint sleeves and the tendon sleeves and the tendon itself. They actually interfere with the healing process. So don't take ibuprofen or these, quote, over-the-counter anti-inflammatories, the big powerful ones the doctor wants to give, or even steroids, because steroids interfere with normal collagen production too. So let's talk about how we reduce that. Inflamax, cell defense, curcumin topically, Tendon Mender, Joint Performance, Collagen Max, Mountain Red Velvet. And the person will get better. You can augment that with Lumen Photon and Soma Pulse. Lumen Photon on the setting 7 for pain and Nico for healing, and setting 3 for Soma Pulse. And I tell people, you got to be aggressive on the initial phase, and then you can back off on the dosages once the thing's actually starting to heal. But if you don't, you can't walk around with an aluminum splint on your finger for months. And you certainly as heck don't want the doctor to start talking surgery or steroid injections or anything like that, because once they get into your joint's going to really degenerate now. It gets osteopenic, osteoporotic, you get major modifications of the joint trying to heal, so it doesn't heal the joint correctly, and eventually you get a big ugly joint that's now fused or painful. So what do you think of that approach?
Yeah, it's a scary progression. It doesn't have to be that way, and I like that.
Well, that's the standard that most doctors do it, to be honest with you. They're lazy. They're not, I did rheumatology research now 35 plus years ago in medical school. It's more than that now. And I was working with Dr. John Woodbury, and I reviewed over 22,000 cases and put them in a database, and set up the scientific subroutine to look at all their biochemical parameters, their physical parameters, their history, etc. And I analyzed all that data. It took me hundreds and hundreds of hours of work, which I did basically gratis because I was working on, was digging to try to find it, which is why he tried to get me to do a residency in rheumatology. The fact is, the whole approach to me in medicine is wrong-headed. It doesn't go to the biochemical basis of why something is such and such. Most Western illnesses, for example, are tied directly to elevated hyperinsulinemia caused by elevated sugar in our diet and mineral deficiencies. Fatty acids that are way out of balance are pro-inflammatory. And then we try to chase and say, oh, what's the cause of dementia or the cause of hypertension or diabetes? I'm thinking, long before we get to those end stages of a disease, things are way out of whack. And it's not just genetics. I mean, you know, you take the genetic tendency and you amplify it with bad diet in North America, and you're going to guarantee something bad will happen. Just like you use, how many people are digestive enzyme deficiency or hypochlorhydric? The number of women, especially, and then men about a decade later, that have very little hydrochloric acid or very poor digestive enzymes is mind-boggling. And the first one to go is protein, second is fat, and last is carbohydrate. You mean you still have thiolinase in your saliva, even when you're 80. But you may not be digesting proteins or fats very well at all. And so you're basically starving to death. So when you start taking our gastrozyme and our digestives, and taking GastroHeal to heal your stomach lining, people say, wait, why would you do that for a GERD or gastroesophageal reflux disease or stomach ulcers? I'm saying that's how you heal it. You need to restore stomach acid. You need to restore digestive enzymes. You need to heal the gut wall. You don't, hit it with a proton pump inhibitor or H2 blocker. These are really wrong-headed approaches to the whole problem, aren't they? And you don't deal with the infections. If you get a chronic fungal infection in your esophagus or yeast, it's going to cause esophageal cancer. We know that.
All right.
Helicobacter pylori, the doctor in Australia discovered that, which is a bacteria that generates inflammatory changes to the DNA. So let's talk about GastroHeal and GastroZyme digestives for a second before we finish this hour. We have just a minute left.
Yeah. Well, these are formulations that are going to make a big impact for a lot of people. So that, GastroHeal is one of my favorites. It's a chewable formulation. It's a specific combination for zinc and carnosine. So people that get stuck on purple pills and acid inhibitors really have a great option here to just chew these a couple times a day with meals. It's also been shown in research to offset damage from non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs, as well as the effects of alcohol, which so many people don't realize the damage that they're doing each time they have an alcoholic drink or take one of those types of anti-inflammatories.
Exactly, yeah. It's amazing. Ryan, thanks for the great discussion today we have. We're always trying to teach health professionals and people out there, you're your own private health professional, and you need to know, because your doctor is just not, unless they're called screaming and kicking into the 21st century, they're not going to change their behavior. They're going to have the magic script pad. They're going to have their surgical tools ready to do something inappropriate rather than changing your diet, your lifestyle, your exercise. Your nutraceutical do not activate the wrong set of your genes to make you sick. Take nutraceuticals. Nutrimedical are the only ones, and diet and lifestyle and exercise